I'm a commercial truck driver. Last winter, in the midst of the vast, snow-covered expanse of Western Canada, I found myself navigating my rig. I had been working for a few weeks hauling timber destined for a lumberyard near Vancouver Island. It had been a nice day, the roads clear, but as evening drew nearer, forecasts were calling for a real mean storm, threatening to swallow the landscape in an icy embrace. As I continued along my assigned route, the sky was getting dark quickly, and it had already started to snow. It was then, through the thickening flurries, that I spotted her, a figure standing by the roadside, clearly not equipped for the incoming weather. She wore a thin coat, her thumb extended in a desperate plea for a ride. Against the backdrop of the impending blizzard, I felt a pang of empathy and concern. I slowed down and pulled over, unlocking the door to offer her a ride and some shelter from the weather. As she climbed aboard, her grateful smile revealed a warmth that contrasted the frigid surroundings. Yet the language barrier became immediately apparent. She spoke in a tongue I couldn't decipher, our attempts at communication ending in an awkward silence. I gestured, offering to take her to the next truck stop, a place where she could seek shelter or attempt to contact someone who might understand her language. She nodded in apparent understanding, a sense of gratitude in her eyes despite the fact that we couldn't communicate. The storm continued to intensify after she got in, swirling flurries reducing my view of the road to almost nothing. I navigated the blizzard-laden road cautiously, the occasional glance in the rearview mirror confirming her presence, but she stayed silent. I figured she was just happy that someone was kind enough to pick her up. I've been driving big rig trucks for the last 10 years, and I don't remember the last time I drove through weather this bad, so I was pretty locked in on the road anyway. A few miles from the truck stop, an icy patch on the road caused the truck to swerve violently. I was able to correct a pretty mean fishtail, and onward we went. I thought it was strange that my hitchhiker companion didn't so much as flinch when we nearly went off the road. But then, out of nowhere, things took a turn for the worse. The woman lunged toward the driver's seat, yelling in the same unknown language. I tried to push her away and keep us on the road, but it was as if she had an unreasonable amount of force packed into her little body. I had no idea why she would do such a thing, but it doesn't matter anyhow. During the struggle, I couldn't control the wheel and sent us off the pavement and into a snowbank. My heart raced as I grappled to regain control, but the tires succumbed to the brutal impact. The woman must have hit her head when we made impact because she was slumped silently against the window in the passenger seat, seemingly unconscious. The damage left the truck immobile in the storm. I stepped out into the biting cold, the wind slashing at my face like 1,000 icy blades. Surveying the damage, my heart sank. This was beyond fixing alone in such vicious conditions. A creeping fear gnawed at the edges of my mind, an unnerving sense of vulnerability amplified by the escalating blizzard. Why had she done that? Returning to the truck, I reached for my phone, intent on calling the authorities, only to find the passenger seat beside me empty. A chill ran down my spine, a strange fear gripping me as I scanned the interior. She was nowhere to be found. In that moment, an eerie silence took over the cab, a chilling contrast to the raging storm outside. Panic hit me hard. What was going on? I stumbled back out into the whiteout, the snow once again stinging my face as I searched for any sign of her presence. But there were no footprints in the snow, no trace of her existence outside the truck. It was like she hadn't been there at all. The realization slammed into me. This didn't make any sense. I hopped back into the truck to call for help and waited out, and it was then when I noticed the same thin coat she was wearing when I picked her up, just sitting there in the passenger seat. An inexplicable disappearance in the heart of a blizzard. I didn't see her leave. She hadn't been thrown from the truck. She had simply vanished without a trace, leaving me stranded in the midst of a storm that seemed to conceal secrets beyond the veil of snow and wind. It was an encounter that defied logic, an unsettling encounter with a rogue hitchhiker who dissolved into the heart of a blizzard, leaving me to grapple with an unexplainable and chilling sense of dread. That was the last time I ever picked up a hitchhiker. My name is Johnny. I grew up in Southern California, just south of San Diego. Last year, some friends and I headed to the Baja California Sur for a surf trip and had a great time together. So this year we figured we'd venture a bit further down on a trek to South America. I'm about to turn 24, and my friends came up with the idea of a road trip down through Mexico City as a bit of a birthday gathering. We would just camp out on the beach in our sleeper van together. We had been on the road for days, eating well and enjoying each other's company. Just a bunch of boys having a ball and chasing waves. Our plan was to find the best breaks, explore new spots, and just have an epic trip. Just north of El Salvador, we saw this guy walking alone on a pretty desolate stretch of dirt back road. We may have been slightly lost, so as a group we decided to stop to chat with him for a bit and see if he could give any directions. He told us if we followed the same road for another half hour or so, that we'd eventually get back onto a more main road that would bring us further south towards our destination. So we picked up this guy. He said he would be happy to help along the way, and he was going to Nicaragua too. He looked roughed up, but seemed friendly enough, so we let him join us. At first he blended in, sharing stories from the road and giving us tips about the area. We thought he was just a cool guy, someone who knew his way around. He was texting someone kind of non-stop along the way, but who isn't on their phone these days? Things started feeling weird as the day faded into night. He guided us through these back roads, but it seemed to take longer than he had suggested it would before he got in the camper van. I asked him when we could expect to get back on a main road, and he kind of brushed it off without a clear answer, gesturing to follow the dirt road further. It was then that the vibe began to change. Suddenly it felt off, like we weren't just on a surfing trip anymore. This guy was acting strange. We were all a bit on edge at this point, trying to figure out what was up with this guy and where he was taking us. Then, out of nowhere, things went south. At a crossroads, the van was suddenly surrounded and blocked from moving by several trucks. Panic started to set in as we realized the hitchhiker wasn't who he said he was. He wasn't nervous like the rest of the group was. He told us to let him out so he could try to talk to the guys in the trucks to see what they wanted. He hopped out and started having a conversation with these guys, using hand motions to point back up the road from where we had come from. They were all dressed in what looked like police uniforms, but they had rifles with them, and it became more apparent these weren't just some guys that were lost on these back roads too. We thought maybe he was working for some local cartel. Panic began to set in. Maybe it was some sort of a setup. It was like a scene from a movie, but we were right in the middle of it. They started threatening us and asking for wallets and IDs, making it clear we were caught up in something way bigger than simply being lost on a back road. We were scared, man. Lost in a place we didn't know, stuck in some sketchy situation, all because we picked up a stranger on the road. It was then that my friend Pat decided enough was enough, and he slammed on the gas of our van, sideswiping one of the trucks in the process, and blasting through some light brush just off the road, trying to get away from these guys. Pat was not messing around and was gassing it on these little back roads in the dark, but I can't say that any of us blamed him for that bold maneuver. We couldn't see if the guys even tried to follow us due to clouds of dust behind the van, but we all agreed that we just had to get out of that situation and kept on trucking. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that not everyone out there has good intentions. Our dream surfing trip had nearly turned into a nightmare, a lesson that adventures can quickly turn sour when you trust the wrong person on the road. But we were lucky that night, I believe. After that insane encounter, we found a safe spot to camp for the night, always looking over our shoulders, half expecting trouble to find us again. The next day, though, we hit the waves for a few hours in a little cove. It was like the ocean washed away all the stress and fear from the night before. Surfing always had a way of doing that for us. It brought back the joy and the freedom we were seeking when this trip started. We talked it over and decided to cut our trip short. The whole experience had freaked us out, and we were done taking chances. We packed up and began to make our way back home. It felt good to be back on familiar ground, away from the uncertainty and danger. The hitchhiker and those guys were a crazy detour in our journey, but we were grateful to be safe and together, with some wild stories to tell back home. Back in the summer of '79, my girlfriend and I took a few weeks off from work and were traveling around Colorado. just to see the sights. The air was thick with anticipation as we headed to a concert at Red Rocks Amphitheater. It had been a nice day. We had gone to this huge farmer's market, checked out a bunch of shops in some small towns, and we were just having fun together. We started driving to the show later that afternoon, as it was a few hours away from where we had been staying, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire. Amidst the fading light, I spotted a lone figure by the roadside holding a sign that read, "To Red Rocks or Bust." I laughed to myself, thinking, what are the odds we'd find a guy going to the same show this far out? Why didn't he have a ride? There was something peculiar about him, an unsettling aura that lingered as I pulled over. He looked a bit dirty, but he told us that his car broke down a few miles back and that he just wanted to get to the show that night. He even offered to give us some cash. It wasn't all that odd for people to travel around and follow these psychedelic rock bands, so I figured I could help him out, and I told him to hop in. He climbed into the back seat of our van, his gaze darting around. He seemed a little nervous, which I guess wasn't all that weird if you're hopping into a car with someone you don't know. His demeanor was off somehow, though, a strange restlessness in his movements. I asked him where he was from, what his story was. He said he'd been laid off from work about a year ago, and he'd been following the band for the last 4 months, just traveling to every show. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little jealous of the lifestyle. As we ventured closer to the concert venue, his conversation started to turn. He struck a fear within me, asking how our vacation had been going. How he knew we were on vacation was strange. What struck me as off was when he asked what he thought of the last farmer's market we had gone to earlier that day. It was as if he was more aware of where we'd been than I'd like. I looked at my girlfriend out of the corner of my eye. I could tell she was creeped out too. Had this guy been following us earlier? Then, with an abrupt shift, our trip morphed into something sinister. He just had an odd grin in the back seat. We were kind of quiet after his conversation got a little too personal. I got uncomfortable after a few minutes of no conversation. He then leaned forward behind the driver's seat and whispered, "You shouldn't have picked me up." I said, "What do you mean, man? We were just trying to help you get to the show." I tried to dismiss his ominous words, passing them off, but an escalating sense of dread wrapped around me. It was suffocating. We weren't too far from the venue at this point, so I just wanted to get there and get rid of this guy. Every mile that passed, the unease grew thicker, an invisible weight pressing against my chest. I contemplated asking him to just get out, but before I could voice my unease, I saw a sudden movement behind my driver's seat as he whipped out 2 syringes, their glint catching the fading sunlight through the dash. Panic surged through me as he jabbed my girlfriend and me in the upper back, injecting us with something. I screamed, "What are you doing, man?" just before my surroundings blurred into a surreal haze, my thoughts spiraling into an abyss of terror. I fought to maintain control of the car, the world around me dissolving into a chaotic frenzy of hallucinations and fear. The car careened off the road as I lost control, hurtling our van into a violent collision with a tree. I could feel myself dipping off, darkness consuming my reality. Then I was out. When consciousness slowly trickled back, I found myself in a hospital bed, disoriented and confused. A police officer stood nearby. He recounted the horrific events that transpired after the crash. He detailed the grotesque scene. A fellow officer was actually on the road just behind our van when I went off the road, he told me. He saw us crash up ahead and immediately stopped to help. He told us that when he rushed up to our vehicle, the stranger was leaning over the driver's seat, indulging in a nasty assault. He was cutting up parts of my arm and seemingly eating the pieces. The officer told me the guy wouldn't even acknowledge him, so he intervened, firing a shot through one of the van's side windows to cease the deranged onslaught. The shock and horror of the situation left me trembling. I looked down at my arm. It was covered in bandages. Hospital tests revealed significant amounts of liquid acid in both my girlfriend and me. I just thought back to how odd the guy was, but also how lucky we were that that cop was so close to us when everything went down. It was meant to be a night of music and fun, yet it teetered on the brink of a horrific tragedy. My warning to you is always beware of strangers on the road.